Would anybody deny that the IDF is far, far more powerful than Hamas? Of course it is. But the idea that the IDF is going to defeat Hamas and put an end to this conflict in Gaza is a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. The Israelis are not going to defeat Hamas, despite the tremendous military advantage that Israel has over Hamas. If you look at pure material capabilities, again, it's the limits of military force. I go back to my youth and the Vietnam War. The United States was far more powerful than Vietnam. Fast forward to Afghanistan, the United States up against the Taliban. This is Bambi versus Godzilla. But who won? Bambi won. Bambi won in Vietnam. This just tells you there are significant limits as to what you can do with powerful military forces, and you have to understand that.
Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks for watching. My name is Matthew. Hope you have enjoyed that quirky little clip from John Mearsheimer a couple months ago explaining how Bambi can defeat Godzilla. Now, if you remember, at the top of my first video on this topic of military expenditure, I did indeed talk about how Bambi can defeat Godzilla with the Afghanistan versus United States example. And of course, the same thing happened when the Soviets were there as well, so I understand that. But what I want to do in this video is try to drill down exactly what Mr. Mearsheimer, the self-proclaimed realist, revisionist, military historian, is actually saying about Hamas versus Israel. Because a few minutes before, in this same video interview, he said that, of course, Ukraine was going to lose in Russia. So the question is, why is Hamas a Bambi that's going to defeat Godzilla, but Ukraine is not a Bambi that's going to defeat Godzilla? So at the very least, we're doing an analysis here in consistency and logic. But more importantly, we're going to see some very clear moral, quantitative, and qualitative military factors that just simply do not add up with Mr. Mearsheimer's analysis. All right, so let's get to it and solve that in this video. Last two videos, I showed you the 20-year spend of various militaries, the 10-year spend of various militaries, all in US dollar terms, as well as the 23-year spend. We said, of course, Ukraine, of this group of 47 nations, has had to spend the most in the last year relative to its peers. You can just see that this bump here for Ukraine. They spent nearly 50% of the last 10 years of military spend in 2023, all right, trying to defend against an illegal, aggressive, autocratic, dictatorial aggressor that is Vladimir Putin and his debacle of a mafia state, Russia. So let's take off the 20-year spend. Let's take off the 2023 year spend. For this video, I'm just going to look at the 10-year spend. So again, Russia versus Ukraine, Hamas versus Israel. That is the comparison that we're trying to sort through with Mr. Mearsheimer's analysis that he showed in the last clip and how Bambi can defeat Godzilla. So let's look at Israel. And let's look down the list here to Egypt. I told you before I'd come back to that. Here it is. First of all, the order here is from the 20-year spend. If you're wondering, this is why the order is a little bit different on the 10-year spend. You can see, of course, Ukraine is much higher in the 10 years than it was on the 20-year spend, having to deal with its incredible non-peaceful prior 10 years compared to the 10 years before that. Again, Ukraine invaded no one after the Soviet Union fell. Russia invaded Georgia, Ukraine multiple times, Chechnya multiple times, and others. A very belligerent nation. Ukraine has never done that at all, as well as giving up their nukes. So let's take a look here. Israel, the 10-year spend of the Israeli military. And again, I understand this is just one quantitative feature, over $200 billion for 10 years. Let's go down the list here to Egypt. Now, Egypt shares a border with Israel. They also share a border, somewhat famously, I imagine by now, with Gaza. And many weapons, UN aid, and other things gets in through the Egyptian-Gaza border, which Israel has had no control of for 20 years. What is Egypt's military spend over the last 10 years? $40 billion. Okay, so very simply, how many times does 40 go into 200 for Israel? About 5 times. Israel, over the last 10 years, has spent on its military 5 times more than Egypt. Now, why do I show Egypt? Again, because it is at peace with Israel, has been for about 50 years. But in some circles, we could say that it supports Hamas and clearly, as I just said, aid, equipment, all of the siphoning off of resources to build all of their tunnels and have their rockets. Clearly, that was done primarily through Egypt. Nonetheless, Hamas itself as a military enterprise, way smaller than Egypt. How much smaller? Let's say about $2 billion over the last 10 years. Okay, we can look at various sources that say the Hamas budget last year was 300 million, something like that. That means it's smaller every year prior. Again, most of this should be UN aid coming in for Palestinians. Hamas is siphoning it off to create rockets and build tunnels under Gaza. But let's just say roughly over the last 10 years, I think 4 billion is too much. I think 10% of Egypt's budget over the last 10 years is just too much. Let's say 2 billion. So it's not on the chart here, but Hamas, let's say Hamas's military budget over the last 10 years, $2 billion. How many times does that go into Israel's military budget? That's 100 times. That's 100 times smaller than Israel's military over the last 10 years. Let's now take a look at Russia. Let's go Russia, and let's go all the way again to Egypt, actually, in this little analysis, this little example. 10-year military spends. Russia, $750 billion on its military over the last 10 years. Ukraine, we got to go down the list, all right, to the country that Russia illegally, immorally invaded full scale. About 3 years ago, all the experts, including John Mearsheimer, thought it was going to take 3 days. John Mearsheimer thought that Russia wasn't even going to invade, so he is wrong about everything here. But nonetheless, Ukraine's military budget over the last 10 years, $145 billion. Now, $145 billion into $750 billion. How many times is that over the last 10 years? What's the multiple? 5x. 5x. Russia's military budget is 5 times larger than Ukraine. That's very interesting because from the point that I was just making before, Hamas is clearly well smaller than Egypt's military budget, which is $40 billion. And keep in mind, we've seen how relatively swiftly Israel has moved into Gaza over the last year since the October 7th tragedy of 2023. Israel's military budget, we're assuming here, is about 100 times the size of Hamas. It clearly can't be the size of Egypt. Egypt is only 5 times smaller than Israel's. Okay, so when we talk about Russia and Ukraine, from a purely number standpoint, we're talking about something that is not Israel and Hamas. We're talking about something that is like Israel and Egypt. So, again, this logical fallacy, this logical inconsistency, how could it be that Mr. Mearsheimer in this video was saying that Bambi can defeat Godzilla, watch out, and just a few minutes before that had made the claim that Ukraine simply was going to lose to Russia, when the numbers are clearly so different? All right, so to summarize, Israel's military budget should be about 100 times higher than Hamas's over the last 10 years. Russia is factually only about 5 times larger than Ukraine's. Okay, so much more comparable, in fact, to Israel and Egypt than Israel and Hamas. So again, it does not make any sense from this perspective from Mr. Mearsheimer. Those are the quantitative features, okay? Now let's go to a few qualitative features here. Okay, as I said, Russia, the mafia state, dictatorial, has controlled the media. Mr. Putin since 2000, 2001, took Berezovsky, Gusinski's channels, nationalized, which means just took over, privatized basically for his own usage. Mikhail Khodorkovsky's Yukos oil conglomerate in 2003, again, floated this as Rosneft in the West on the London Stock Exchanges later. The West has a lot of culpability here for letting Russia get too large as a mafia dictatorial state. Taking a moment to remind you that this show is brought to you by Trezor, home of the original Bitcoin hardware wallet. For over 10 years now, Trezor means business in Bitcoin security and functionality. When using their wallet software Trezor Suite to connect to the Bitcoin network, you're automatically connected via Tor, protecting your identity and giving you full control of your coins in a fully open source manner, both on the software level and on the hardware level. So head on over to Trezor.io to grab your brand new Trezor Safe 5 with a secure element, as well as a ton of available accessories to back up your keys and keep your coins safe. Russia clearly is not a democracy. Likewise, Hamas, which has been in power since 2005, unchecked, clearly is not a democracy for the Palestinian people. Russia is a terrorist state, okay? They have used polonium, they've used other neurological, biological banned weapons on European soil, on NATO soil, killed many journalists, killed many defectors, okay? That's the worst thing you can do if you're a Russian, is defect. They're so childish in this manner, so low self-esteem. Russia is a terrorist state, and by the way, yes, qualitatively, Hamas is a terrorist state. So, again, just to summarize there, we have on the other column, Ukraine and Israel, which are liberal democracies. And indeed, Ukraine and Israel have not attacked anyone. Now, I understand people can, this is clear cut, by the way, for Ukraine, but I understand that if you are Palestinian, there's a lot of emotions going here, even though that there is a dictatorial terrorist group in the function of Hamas running over your region. I understand that there are a lot of, it's a very charged issue, to say the least, for the Israeli-Palestinian debate. But as far as I know, from what I can tell, the only time Israel has expanded beyond its original territories that were set out in the UN Charter was when a war was waged against it. And this goes back to 1947, 1948. When Israel was attacked, it responded. When Israel was attacked, it responded. So again, if you are, and of course this wasn't Hamas at the time, this was other Arab nations collaborating against Israel, but nonetheless, the Palestinian state lost out in this case as well to certain territories. Nonetheless, if you're going to start a war and you lose it, perhaps there are things to talk about there. Again, all of that is outside the scope of this video. The point is, Ukraine has not attacked anyone ever, going back to the fall of the Soviet Union. Israel has only responded to attacks against its own sovereign territory. And finally, just to make the point again, qualitatively, the Russian people are slaves. 1 in 5 Russians do not have a toilet. Hamas clearly is enslaving the Palestinian people. I think that that is beyond dispute at this point. You really can't argue that at all, that the Palestinian people are enslaved to Hamas. Whether the Palestinian people and the Russian people, respectively, by the way, support Hamas and Putin is another question, again, outside the scope of this video. But it's clearly true to say that the Russian people are slaves, Palestinian people are slaves to the orders that be there in those territories. And indeed, they have met with each other, Putin and Hamas, that is, Hamas, an international terrorist organization. We have a couple more points as well, which don't make any sense according to Mearsheimer's analysis. We have the U.S. backing Ukraine, the liberal democracy. We have the U.S. backing Israel, the liberal democracy. And finally, another confusing, non-consistent point in Mearsheimer's analysis is Indeed, Russia is a nuclear power, and Israel is a nuclear power. So, I'd like for you, dear viewer, to just take a look at this list, at these columns here of Russia and Hamas, and Ukraine and Israel. What in this set of columns makes it immediately clear to you, as Mr. Mearsheimer has been saying really for the last year, but certainly in this clip, that Bambi can defeat Godzilla? And of course, he's referring to Hamas, whereas Ukraine, a smaller liberal democratic power, also backed by a strong United States military, this is a Bambi that cannot defeat Godzilla. There is no ideological consistency there, both on the nuclear front and on the non-nuclear front, both on the quantitative factors and the qualitative factors. He has been wrong consistently about Russia and Ukraine and about Israel and Hamas. And I do think that you should take these factors into consideration now that we are 1 year into the Israeli conflict post-October 7th, and we are 3 years into the Ukrainian invasion post-February 2022. And we are nearly 3 years into the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. Why would it be that Mr. Mearsheimer supports Russia on the one hand and Hamas on the other? Logically, morally, qualitatively, quantitatively, it does not make any sense. Thank you for watching.